Okay, everybody. Hopefully everybody will make their way over here.
All right, try it again.
And we're going to try again. We're just going to wait for Colin to get the new link and join us. So let's see. Very, very strange. Very, very strange. Everything was fine up until we started broadcasting, which tells me that it might be something with Streamyard and recording separate audio files. So we'll see.
Either that or they knew that we were talking about black triangles this morning, and it's like, whoop.
Well, you know what's really weird? There he is. Okay.
Hey, Jeanette, welcome back.
Hey, Jeanette, thank you for joining us. Hey, Aaron, how are you? Wow. All right, we're just waiting for him to get connected and everything.
Samo's back. Hey, Samo.
Hey, Samo, good seeing you back here.
We're waiting for his device to connect.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, not sure. How are you? Thanks for joining us. Sounds good. Awesome. He says 5x5. Yeah, we're, I don't know what it is, but we can talk backstage with Colin and everything sounds great and works great. And then once we start the show, things go crazy. So that's part of the problem with see, he just logged off again. So he might be having some issues on his end. So somebody needs to stop watching Netflix in his house. Maybe that's what it is. So yeah. Oh, we're doing well. Thanks for asking. Not sure. We are just waiting on Colin to be able to join us. Okay. Oh, I think we're going to be good here.
All right, guys, to save some bandwidth, I'm going to go ahead and shut my camera off and I'm going to be backstage, but you'll see me in chat
and be here
and audio.
All right. Colin, let's try this again.
Are we working okay?
I think so.
Can you hear me okay?
Good. Yes.
Right. Cool.
Can you hear us?
Right.
Okay.
So where should we start from again?
Okay, let's try this again. So Michelle had just asked for you to give us a little bit about your background and what inspired you to research and write about triangular UFOs specifically.
Okay, obviously the reason for writing the book was because of my own encounter with my family with a triangle. A brief history of my working career was basically I've worked in the aviation industry. I've worked in Germany, Airbus. I've worked in Sweden for Saab Aerospace. I worked in New Zealand as well for 18 months in refrigeration, always as a draftsman, always drawing. That's all I've done all of my life is draw for a living. I'm still drawing 64, waiting for retirement, but I'm still drafting. I'm still drawing away within the embroidery industry. One of the jobs I had along the way was working onshore for Chevron Petroleum, but I did have a couple of offshore trips. And the thing about when you're doing drawings of an installation, you've got to make sure you've got it all right, every single piece, because when you get back to the office, back to the drawing office, you've got to draw what you've seen. And if you just like helicopter, go back out to the platform and look at what you've forgotten. So that turned out to be great training for when I had the actual encounter with the UFO. Eventually, after all of my traveling, I came back to live in the UK when my daughter was born. And at the point of the encounter, I'd started my own business and I was working from home. This turned out to be a godsend. To the encounter, I couldn't concentrate on about the UFO, and I started doing drawings and building models. So that's basically a quick resume of my working career. So from there, unless you've got any questions, I'll go into the actual sighting of the triangle.
Yeah, go ahead, because I have some other questions that will kind of feed off of your sighting of your triangle and what happened there. So please continue.
Okay, so basically what happened, it was the 31st of March 1999. That was my mother-in-law's birthday that day. She was 72 years old and out for a bar meal to a public house in the countryside. Now, there were two vehicles. There was my wife was driving the first car. We got a Ford Fiesta, and we picked up my mother-in-law, and my daughter and myself was in the car with my wife driving. In the second vehicle was my brother-in-law, who lived next door to me mother-in-law. He had a range partner, so he got two of his of her grandparents staying over, and so the two vehicles, we went off to the public house called the White Lion in the little village of Paleton. So when we come to leave the pub, it was 9:50 p.m. I remember we got into the car. My wife was driving, and my mother-in-law was sitting in the passenger seat next to her, and me and my daughter were in the back of the car. I turned around and I remember seeing the Range Rover. They were struggling to get the old lady into the Range Rover because it's quite a high step and she wasn't very agile. So we drove off ahead, assuming they were going to catch us up on the way. So we are in a remote village and we're going through the countryside. There's no street lights, and we're coming up to a major road called the Foss Way. I say a major road, but there's still a Foss Way. It's an old Roman road, and that goes up and joins another road called the Watling Street, which is also a Roman road. Apparently, Roman roads are built on ley lines, because I know some people are interested in ley lines. So as we approached the Foss Way, somebody actually said, "Oh, we're turning onto the Foss now." And my daughter said, "Oh, there's been talk of headless horsemen down here." And we all laughed and joked and said, "Oh, we'll keep our eyes open for him." And as soon as we turned the corner onto the Foss Way, there were some lights in front of us, a half a mile away, hovering by the side of the road. And it was an incredible lights you'd ever seen. It was mainly red with a bit of white mixed in, and they were just flashing away, and it was just the most incredible laser show that you've ever seen, like a fireworks display. And we were going, "What on earth's that like? There's no lights on the way down. We're going up and down this road for years. There's no pylons with lights on the top, and there's no aircraft that would be that low, and helicopters wouldn't have that amount of lights, tall lights." And we drove to them. I would say the lights would be 100 feet away from us to the side, just hovering over this field. So I always use this analogy. A friend of mine's got a 70-foot narrowboat that I've steered around the Ashby Canal. So when I say 100 feet, I mean 100 feet. You could have hit it with a cricket ball. It was that close. But the thing was, it was only lights at this point. There was no triangle. There was just lights. There were, at the back, there was 4 big red lights in a line, but they were tilted at an angle to the earth of about 30 degrees. They weren't level with the earth. And there was a smaller red light off to one side as well. And the white men, and I stared at one of the big red lights at the back, the fourth one, the one that was highest up on the angle. And it seemed to have like a crisscross effect in it. It looked like an etching of, say, like a traffic light less. But you could tell it wasn't etched into the material. It was like an effect of the wave that was coming out of the red light. It was like a laser beam, and it got this crisscross effect in it. Something along the lines of Newton's law of ring interference. I think that's the sort of thing that it was given. And it was given this grid pattern. And it's whilst I was staring at this grid pattern and this big red light that the sky suddenly started to ripple around the lights. And that was the time I thought to myself, "My God, there's something there. It's not just lights. There's an object that was invisible around the lights." And as soon as I thought that, it became solid. It decloaked. It was just like Star Trek. It decloaked in front of us and became this solid metallic object. Now, the rear end was, we were looking at the rear end of the object. Now, the craft was that low to the ground that the rear end stayed where it was and the nose floated up in the air. If it had turned from the middle of that, it would have struck the ground. It was that low. So the rear end that was closest to the car stayed where it was, and the nose came up in the air, and the machine floated up like a submarine underwater. So what that did then was to give us a view of the top of the craft. And not many people get to see the top of these triangles. Most people get to see the bottom of them as they come overhead. But we were looking at the top of the craft. Prior to this, I had UFOs. I wasn't involved in UFOs. I wasn't in any UFO groups. So to, and it got looking down on the surface. It looked like a lake at night that's catching the moonlight. It's got the waves on it, and it's whipping up and down. But on top of that liquid was these girders, these beams, silver beams that were interlocking, like an old-fashioned maze. Remember that this thing floated. Aliens. The second one was abductions must take place, and the third one was this explains mysteries that we've had in history. I knew all of that straight away as this thing rose up in front of us. Now, this is the nuts and bolts of the story I'm talking about at the moment, and for the first 20 years of the experience, I taught about the nuts and bolts. But something peculiar took place that night as well, which we'll come back to in a little while if we don't mind. I'll just save that for a little bit later on.
Yeah.
But the craft, when the craft rose up in front of us, my wife, we'd stopped the car, but my wife, the driver, who was a very sensible person, decides to put a hazard flashing lights on. She drives forward and reverses into a gateway. Now, the problem with that is as she drove forward, there was a large hedge. We couldn't see the craft anymore. So when she was like, it's going to go now. So she reversed into the gateway. We jumped out. Sure enough, it had gone. And there was no smell of any aviation fuels, nothing like that at all. But in the distance, there was a large craft with 4 big red lights on the rear of it. So I assumed at the time, because I knew nothing about triangles, that it was the same craft, and it had somehow changed its size and gone into this massive football pitch sized craft that was silently floating away from us, going away from us. So we stood there, and there were no traffic, no airplanes, there was nothing. It was quiet. You could hear a pin drop. So that was the end of the sighting. So we got back in the car. I must admit, at the time, me and my mother-in-law, we were really excited. We would have got on board, no doubt about it, if we'd have got the chance. But wife and daughter, they were a little bit more concerned. So we got back in the car and drove home talking about what we'd seen. And we took my mother-in-law back home. And strangely enough, there's the Range Rover. It's got back before us. But not only that, everybody's out and they're inside having a cup of tea. And that seemed very strange how they did that and didn't see the UFO. They must have been right behind us. So we're not sure how that occurred. Possibly when we was in the gateway, they come rushing past us. But if that had been the case, they would have seen the UFO just before it disappeared. So that was a bit of an enigma on the evening. So basically, that was the sighting. It didn't last that long, but it was long enough for me to get a lot of information about the manufacture of the craft, the way it had been built and put together. So the first thing I did when I got home that night, after we dropped the mother-in-law off, as soon as I got back, I started drawing pictures of the craft and the beams on the surface and the liquid surface. And my daughter did the same. Now, unfortunately, my wife, she didn't see the craft at all. She saw the lights because she was concentrating on the road. And my mother-in-law didn't do any drawings, but she described it as a triangle with metal girders on the surface, that she called them. So, strangely enough, the next day was April the 1st. And I'm trying to tell everybody that we've seen a UFO. And although it was April the 1st,
April Fool's Day?
It was, yeah, April Fool's Day the next day. And I'm trying to tell everybody, but people were going well with it. Nobody really poo-pooed the idea. Nobody had a go at me and said, you're crazy. A lot of people went with it. A lot of people actually said, because it's you, we believe you. So I must have some sort of, I don't know, legitimacy about me. I think it's because of my history of being involved with the aircraft industry and always being technical and always being a draftsman.
Right.
All of those things sort of came together that night when we saw the craft. Right. So from there, what I did, after drawing the craft on Courtaulds, I got some lovely sketches of it. I printed those off and then built some paper models. And I met I found a UFO magazine, and they put me in touch with a guy in England called Omar Fowler. Now, he specialised in triangular UFOs, and he sent me some information through. Now, we never saw the bottom of the craft. We only saw the rear end and the top surface. Now, he sent...
So just real quick. So if I'm going to share this picture that I made the thumbnail out of. So this is what you're talking about, that you saw the rear
Yes.
and the top,
The rear
but you
and the
saw
top.
those interlocking like beams on there,
beams.
correct?
That's right. And also you can see the liquid surface. We've got the effect on this graphic. And what you'll also notice on the bottom two wingtips is vaporization, condensation, fluffy white clouds appearing. Now, I was staring at this one on the left-hand side as I'm looking, the one that's for highest up. That's the one I was staring at, yeah. And when the craft materialized, I noticed that fluffy white cloud appearing on the corner. Now, there was also another red light off to one side, a smaller light. And when the craft first materialized, I could see like the shape of a diamond. But when I built the craft, it didn't seem right to build a diamond-shaped rear end. So I built it with a flat bottom. Now, what I found was when I was playing with the craft, and if I tilted the nose down slightly, so the nose just came into view, it would give you the silhouette of a diamond. And the little red light I could see off to one side was, in fact, the small red light on the nose of the craft. It's a bit difficult to explain without showing it. So, for instance, this is one of my models. If I tip the nose down slightly, you can then see a silhouette of a diamond. And you can also get this red light front comes into view. We'll come to this model in a little while.
Yeah, so yeah, it would look like a diamond with the nose kind of pointing toward
down.
The ground. Yeah.
I'd say we didn't see the bottom, but we glimpsed the underneath without realizing what we was looking at the time. Now, the magazine that Omar Fowler sent to me, one of his journals, had got a sighting from Belgium in the 1990s, where a triangle had flown over this young guy's head in a town called Stockis in Belgium, and he did a sketch. And amazingly enough, underneath the bottom of the triangle that he sketched were these interlocking beams. And now I thought that's too much of a coincidence for it not to be either the same craft that I've seen or same series of craft. So what I did, I took my side top, the bottom, and the rear, and used the Belgium sighting. So on the audio, you won't see this, but those on YouTube, you see this is the bottom. This is from Belgium. We never saw the bottom. So the bottom may well have been flat for all we know, but I believe it was going to be like this because that's very similar, obviously, to the beams on the surface that we saw.
Right. So
using those, it allowed me to build a model. The first model I built.
Hey, Colin.
I made it. Yes.
1 second. Can you hold up the back of that model one more time? And I want Michelle to chime in here.
So,
okay, there we go.
It was at 30 degrees to the earth like that. It wasn't flat to the earth. And when it reared up, you could see the liquid surface, which we tried to replicate on this craft, and also then the interlocking beams. But if I was to tilt the notes down slightly, you'll get the shape of a diamond coming
diamond
into view.
Shape, yeah.
And this little red light at the front here will also come into view. And that's the little red light we could see off to one side when we first came upon the craft.
Okay, so Michelle saw the back of our craft. I was driving, she was the passenger. And I want her to tell you what she saw, which is quite amazing, Michelle.
Now see on the back, it was either the side or the back, I saw two red rectangular lights. So like we would normally see them in a car, moving along once it hits its brake lights. I saw the red lights at the back. Underneath there were only 3 lights that we had witnessed. I did not see the center one. It was only the white lights that were underneath on each of the points. It never pivoted where we could see the top of it, but we were able to see kind of like a cloak or skin underneath. So where it would just absorb any light that was coming from the ground surface with the street lights that time of night.
So more like kind of the picture that you have on your book here is kind of what we saw. And I was the one, because I was driving, the craft was off my left-hand side. And when I was driving, I was looking up at it. And when we got pretty much right underneath it, I looked up, and what it looked like to me was a heat mirage coming off of blacktop. But these lights here, in the corners were super bright white lights, and there was nothing in the center, and I couldn't make out any detail because of this weird wavering effect. And maybe that's the cloaking thing or what it was doing to try to hide or show itself or whatever. But there was no center light, which, you know, so many people talk about the center light, and we didn't see it. And then I continued on.
They do, yeah. And often, like, people will say if they do see a centre light, it's not always white. Sometimes it can be red, and the red lights in the corners can be white as well. It can be reversed. And also in the book, there are some witnesses who talk about rectangular lights on craft. So, in fact, there's 130 different reports in the book, and not 2 of them are exactly the same. But they're all slightly different from each other, which I think is quite an important thing to note.
Exactly.
So to get back to the models, I built my first model out of some plywood and a bit of doweling, and I had that in my works van. That was the last time I seen it. Now my van got broken into on my driveway of the house, and the stereo cassette player was stolen from it. This is back in the 90s, but even then, you know, a cassette player was old-fashioned. I can't see why somebody would want to break in and steal it. I took my vehicle to my friend to get it repaired, and he said it had been professionally broken into, and he couldn't understand why somebody with them skills would steal an old cassette player. But funnily enough, I never did find that model again, and I know the last time I had it, it was in the van. So whoever took the cassette player also took my first model that I built of the UFO, which seemed a bit odd. I don't know why anybody would take that I've made, because they wouldn't even know what it was, one assumes. So that led me to building the second model, the Mark II. But this time I built it again with plywood and doweling, but decided to buy some flashing LEDs and a battery pack. And this is the first model that I made, for those who can see it. And it still works. Here's the lights flashing away on the rear, and 3 lights underneath. Now this was a great model. I did take it onto television once here in the UK and talk to people about it, but I couldn't get the liquid surface, and I couldn't get the raised beams on the surface. But nonetheless, it was a pretty good model to show people what we'd seen. I mean, having a model makes it far more tangible than just talking about it. So what happened next was a friend of mine, John Mills, came to me one day and said he bought a 3D printer, and he was starting to play around with it, and he said he wanted to print my UFO for me. Great, and put the beams on the surface. So this was his first attempt. So this is a little small handheld UFO triangle, and on this one we've actually got the beams on the surface raised off in 3D, as you can see there.
Yep.
And the central white core that the top and bottom were joined onto, lights all over it. So John spent quite a bit of time getting this ready, and he did it all free of charge for me, which was great. So as a reward, I said to him, because I still wanted a model with silver beams and the actual fluid surface. We hadn't achieved it, although this model was good. So what I said to John, if I sell some of these models for you and sell enough, would you make me a large version? And he agreed. So we started selling these on eBay. Now, a friend of mine in Canada did some graphics for me. He's got a fantastic website. If you buy the book, you'll see his website's in the book. And I sent John in that direction to have a look at the images that the guy produced of my model. And that's what we've been looking at here on the screen today, actually. These have come from Canada, the one we were looking at earlier with the lights at the back. John liked it so much that on the website, there was a flying saucer, which you can see behind me. So he decided to manufacture one of those, and also a cylinder. So I sold these on eBay. I didn't make any money. In fact, it cost me £1 or so myself by the time the eBay took the commission and we got the postage and packaging. But all the money I gave to John, and eventually he made this little beauty for me. So this is the final version. Now on this one, you can see we've got the silver beams raised off the surface. You can actually see the liquid surface, the effect of the liquid on the surface. You can see how the top and bottom are rolled over like a hovercraft skin to this central white core, and the beams on the surface, and of course the lights, it all lights up. And it was with this model I decided that because John had done that, I would take it out and go to a UFO conference and do a presentation. So I went to the Outer Limits magazine conference here in the UK. This is last year at Hull. And I met a couple of guys there, the Kinsella twins, and I was chatting away to them. And Ronnie says, Philip says, why don't you write a book? Well, I thought, I thought about writing a book, but not until I retired. And with that impetus, I decided, well, I'm going to write a book. So I came back and started straight away writing the book. I put my own sighting in, which is what I really wanted to talk about, but there's not enough to fill a book. Along the way, I've done some newspaper articles here in my own town of Hinckley in Leicestershire. And from that, I asked people to get in touch with me. And there were quite a lot of people locally, about 10 Googles. So I put there and started to build up a network of people. Now, so over the last 20 years, 24 years, because I've been on Facebook quite a lot and been to different conferences, a lot of people have sent me information along the way. So I've collected up all the messages, all the emails, and started pulling all of those in to create the book. And I decided to write the book purely about triangles and triangles of the United Kingdom, because that's what I was primarily interested in. And so that's what happened. I wrote the book. I got a lot of information from people. The community's been really good in providing people's different experiences. And like I say, I've got over 130 different sightings in the book. And that's quite phenomenal. I've learned quite a bit from the book myself as well along the way. I can touch on some of those things as well as we're chatting.
Well, one of the questions I did want to ask you is, what challenges did you face in researching and writing about these sightings, and then how did you address them?
To be honest, everybody was really positive about writing the book. I've never had so much help from the community as I have in writing this book. There was nothing getting in the way at all. Everybody was more than happy to send me their reports in. So in a way, it was not easy, but it wasn't difficult to get all information together. And it was quite enlightening to see how many people wanted to talk to me as well. So it's been sort of like self-propelling, if you like, the book. It's something I'm very proud of doing. I couldn't have done it without the community, without people helping me. And I'm amazed I've actually written a book. So I don't class myself as an author. I've got no plans to write another one at the moment.
So how do sightings of, throughout your research here, how do sightings of triangular UFOs compare to other types of UFO sightings? And you can even be specific to the United Kingdom if you want. And what I mean by that is, like, in terms of frequency and even credibility, how would you stack up these sightings?
Yeah, obviously I'm going to be biased on that because it's
Mhm.
triangles that I've always been interested in. So anything about triangles on the internet, I have a look at, and I join triangle groups. Anything to do with triangles, I've had a look at. Now, if I'd have seen a flying saucer that night, then I guess I would be on the saucer route. And the same as if I'd have seen an angel, then I'd probably be religious now. But I'm not. I've seen an extraterrestrial spacecraft. So one of the things we need to touch on, which is a bit of the paranormal side of this. Now, I assume that you've had maybe more than one sight and then maybe some paranormal experiences as well. I'm hoping so.
Yeah, but it was
because
I had some weird paranormal things go on, but it was way before any UFO sighting, which involved, like, after my mother had passed away, and seeing some weird shadow people. But this was, man, it had to be 25 years before the UFO sighting that we had. But go ahead, we'll jump in here.
Perfect. Yeah, it's perfect. Now, so for the first 20 years, I talked about the nuts and bolts. Then I started to open up about some of the weird stuff. Now, it's not going to sound that dramatic, but it's had a great impact on me. Let's go back to the night, to the 31st of March 1999. We're sitting in the car and the craft floats up in front of us. The nose floats up like a submarine underwater. I get the three thoughts about aliens, abductions, and history. But then, strangest thing, it was just like somebody got a pair of binoculars and put them in front of my eyes like that, because all of a sudden I could see the surface close up. I could see the beams interlocking. That was one view. Then the next view was the nose, close up of the nose, and I got a feeling, well, it would be the front nose at the top. And the way it was manufactured was incredible. I mean, it was so spherical and so beautiful and smooth. I remember thinking it was just an incredible bit of engineering. And then there was a third view, which was the central white core of the craft, which is here. That's it. You can see the central white core of the craft. The top and the bottom grey parts of the craft were joined onto this central white core, and they were rolled over like a hovercraft skin, or like the pie on the edge of a pastry. But the thing was, there was no nuts and bolts, there were no rivets, there were no welding, no seams, no nothing. The way it had been put together was incredible. And then I remember saying, stop, I want to get out, I want to get on board, like with my mother-in-law, she wanted to get on board. And that's when my wife pulled forward and blocked the view. So the next day, after this experience, I'm thinking about these views. It took a while for me to sort of figure out that I'd seen such close-up images. So I decided then that I'd had an out-of-body experience. I was thinking, I must have got close to the craft. Maybe I got so excited during the course of it, I've had an out-of-body experience. And that's how I managed to get close to the craft and see the details. Now, without the close images, I would not have been able to build such an accurate craft, because from the angle that we saw the craft, we never saw the central white core. I only saw that from close viewing. So I know it sounds crazy, so it will make sense as I go along. So I tried to have out-of-body experiences. Again, I got books out of the library, but I didn't seem to be able to do it. And then we used to have some fantastic conferences in England with a guy called Graham Birdsall and Russell Callahan. They used to organise conferences in Leeds. They used to run a UFO magazine here, but unfortunately Graham passed away and the UFO magazine and the conferences went with him. But in the early days, I went to all those conferences and I met people like Stanton Freeman and Dr. Roger Lear, Stephen Greer, but I also met, more importantly, the late Bud Hopkins. And I managed to speak with Bud for about 30 seconds. There was a queue of people waiting to see him. But I got to Bud and I said, Bud, I've had this close encounter with a triangle, me and my family, it reared up in front of us. And then I had an out-of-body experience and I got these 3 close images of the craft. And he goes, no, he says, that wasn't an out-of-body experience. He says, that was telepathy. Those images were placed in your mind by those people on the craft, who was the aliens on the craft. Now, before we got a chance to expand on that, this lady butted in, this Irish woman who got a crystal. She said, oh, Bob, I found this crystal in the forest where there was a UFO. What do you think to it? And Bob, being Bob, was chatting to her then. That was the end of my 30 seconds. So he told me that it wasn't an out-of-body experience. It was images placed in my mind, telepathy. Well, I didn't take it on board. This is quite some time ago. This is probably 20 years ago. But I put it on the back burner. But what happened after the UFO event, the next day we started to have electrical problems at home with the TV and the video recorder, a clock in a cooker and a kettle, and hard drive on my computer went down, all on the very next day. Then after that as well, I was now starting to have other experiences. Only me, not the other occupants of the car, but I was starting to see other lights in the sky. But more importantly, I was getting what I would call definite paranormal activity. There were some splats on the head, some cracks in the car, some whip cracks. And I kept a list of the dates of everything that was going on. And I'll tell you the most frightening one. I'll go through that one now. Basically, I was out fishing. I was standing in a river, enjoying myself. And I heard some footsteps coming across the field towards me. And I know that some of the farm workers will go down there shooting. So I thought I'll go make myself known. I didn't want them shooting in my direction. So I climbed up the riverbank, but there's no one there, no one at all. But the noise is continuing. And it's 4 footsteps and it's coming towards me. And it's getting louder and louder. And I'm thinking, this is a cat. This is a big cat that somebody's released in the countryside and it's going to come and eat me. And I was panicking. I thought, what am I going to do? And the only thing I could think of doing was getting a spike out of my rod holder that I use for my umbrella. And if it was a big cat, I was going to go back down the riverbank and get it to jump on me and impale it on its own weight as it jumped on top of me. That was my game plan. It's amazing how quick your mind is working in these situations. So it walked up to me, this thing, and walked in front of me. It could have been no more than 3 or 4 feet away, 6 feet maximum, really loud, 4 footsteps. And it came from the left and went off to the right. And as it went away, I got a bit braver and started whistling and shouting. I got the pole and started whacking the grass, but nothing came out, but nothing was moving. So I stood there and I thought, that wasn't a cat. And in fact, I realised that whatever it was wasn't actually here in this world. It was somewhere else, like one of these space-time contingencies or something. And that was the day, Wayne, that I absolutely decided that these UFOs are interdimensional and not extraterrestrial. Because why am I having all these other experiences? I had none prior to the UFO, but lots of experiences after the UFO. And this was the only time I've ever been frightened during the whole course of it, was when this invisible creature walked up to me down at the riverbank. So one of the things I couldn't understand is why the other people were not having any extra experiences. It was just happening to me. So what happened next was I did a presentation in Birmingham to a UFO group there, and the leader, Dave Holdren, said to me he'd got a report about a guy doing telepathy. These 2 guys had seen a spacecraft land in this field. It was a long way off, and they'd seen the occupants and were watching them from a long distance. But he said all of a sudden this face was right in front of him, like it projected it across the field and scared him. And I thought, well, that's similar live experience, but not quite the same, you know, the close viewing. And then out of the blue, this guy in America contacted me from Connecticut. I've put his email in the book, but he's not spoken to anybody else, just to me. And his email started off by saying, just like you, I had 3 images placed in my mind when I had a close encounter with a triangle. He says the first image was some pipe work on the outside of it. Second image was one of the light sources, like a plasma ball. And the third image was inside the craft. Now, prior to that, I've been listening to a lot of Dr. David Jacobs' work on abductees and what goes on craft. And the amount of telepathy comes up all the time. You hear it time and time again. And telepathy as well, sometimes they talk about images being placed in the mind. And I'd always thought that telepathy was words going backwards and forwards between people. But then if you give a picture paints 1,000 words. So if you can do telepathic image rather than telepathic words, you can get a lot more information across. And that was a eureka moment. When I got that email, I suddenly thought, wow, Bud Hopkins was right all along. Those images were placed in my mind. It makes sense now. And that's why only me has gone on to have these other experiences after the UFO event, and the other 3 members of the family haven't, because they didn't have images placed in the mind. Then it took some taking on board to realize that I may well have had images placed in my mind by aliens, or possibly the craft itself, because I swear the craft looked like it was organic. It looked like it was alive. It was clearly manufactured. But when people talk about going on board a craft and flying it, they do it with the mind. So, you know, it hasn't got a steering wheel like a normal car would have. So has the craft got some sort of artificial intelligence itself? I don't know. But certainly without those 3 close views, I would not have been able to have built this model I've got today. So I am convinced that these UFOs are interdimensional, because if it had been extraterrestrial, once we'd seen it, I wouldn't have gone on to have these other experiences. But these other experiences have only come after the UFO. There was nothing ever before. So what happened in the book, when people were writing into me with their experiences, I had to ask them all the time, have you had any paranormal experiences? And more people were saying yes than no. And it just confirmed what I knew. So in the end, I've dedicated a whole chapter to people who have seen UFOs, but also had paranormal experiences. Now, as you touched on earlier, Wayne, you were saying that you've had experiences when you were younger, and then you've ended up seeing a UFO. That seems to be the way that the majority of people go. When read the book, they've all had experiences as children or young adults, and it culminates in a UFO encounter. I seem to have gone the other way around. I've had the UFO encounter first, and then gone on to have the other paranormal experiences.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to follow any rules as to like what happens first or not, because as far as I know, and Michelle, you can speak to this, you've never had any kind of paranormal encounters or anything like that before our sighting together. We were together, right?
Not that I recollect. I mean, if I did, it's not anything that I remember.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna honestly say no. I don't remember having any sort of paranormal, encounters. And I was the first one who, looked at what we saw that night and questioned whether, when our military got that. So that's where my brain was going.
Yeah. So just to back up to your point about the paranormal activities, and I've talked about this stuff before on our show. And in our podcast. So briefly, what had happened was in '99, my mom had passed away. And so my ex-mother-in-law she could preserve flowers and put them in a nice little enclosure and everything. And so it took months because they would freeze dry the flowers, take them apart, take pictures of them, paint them by hand, and then reassemble them. And so she took flowers from the funeral, from like a little bouquet, and put it all together, put it in this enclosure, which I have sitting in the living room over there. And so my ex-wife brought it home. And so she set it on the counter of our apartment, and she's like, look and see what my mom had done. So, okay, no problem. So walk over, and I'm kind of close to it, and I'm looking at it. And all of a sudden I get a smell of, my mom died of lung cancer because she was a smoker. And so I get a smell of her cigarette smoke, very specifically her cigarettes. She smoked a very certain kind of cigarette that had a very unique odor, and I could smell it. And I backed up really fast away from the counter, and the smell was gone. And I looked at my ex and I said, do you smell anything? She's like, no. I said, well, move in closer to this thing and we'll both do it together and tell me if you smell anything. So we moved in closer, and it was like once we got about a foot away from it, the smell was there. And she looked at me, I looked at her, I said, do you smell that? She's like, it's your mom's cigarettes. And we backed up and it was gone. So we did it again. So I keep on testing this, moving in, smell it, back up. Like, okay, we go in for like a third time, and then it was just gone. So the takeaway that we both had from this was she was there looking at the flowers, observing it, letting us know that she was there, and then she was gone. And then it was probably a few years later, we had moved into a new house, and I was home and sleeping because I was going from job to college. And so I was taking a nap. I wake up from the nap because I think I hear my kids running in the hallway of the upstairs by the bedroom. And I roll over and I look, and I can see what looks like the shadows of smaller people running down the hallway. But what was weird was I could see the shadows moving, and then it was like a delay of about 30 seconds, maybe 20 seconds before I heard the footfalls. It was really bizarre. So I jump up and I go down the house, down the stairs, expecting my kids to be there, and there was nobody there. And then in that same house, I had a really, really creepy experience that made me leave the house after it happened. So briefly, we had a dog in the house, and she was a very kind dog. But I come home from college one day, and I come into the house, and off to my left was that staircase that I was just talking about that takes you up to the bedrooms. But at that staircase, we had a baby gate. And that baby gate was basically just laying on the first stair of the staircase. to stop the dog from going up the stairs. We didn't let dogs up on the second floor around the bedrooms and stuff. So, okay, no big deal. I walk in the door, I turn around and shut the door. And as soon as I turned around and looked back down the hallway that was in front of me going toward the kitchen, I can see the head of my dog coming around the corner and looking at me. And the dog is snarling. She's growling at me. I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And she was a pit bull. I'm like, oh my God, this is it. This is where they've talked about pit bulls losing their minds and they go after and attack their owners. So I'm like freaked out. I'm like, what's going on, girl? What's the matter? And she comes around the corner a little bit more, and all of her hackles on her back were standing up. And as I looked at her closer, I noticed she wasn't looking at me. She was looking at this baby gate that was laying on that stairway next to the hallway. And I looked down at it and I'm like, what's the matter with the baby gate? And as soon as I said something to her, the baby gate lifted up on its edge off of the stair and slid down the hallway at the dog and fell before it hit her. But it fell in the hallway. She yiped and ran away. It never made it to her. I saw that. I turned around, went out the door, and I was like, I'm just going to go grab something to eat, and just kind of left it at that. And, you know, I was like, I'm not going to be in this house. And now we found out that property that we built the house on was there was an older gentleman that lived there that basically burnt the house down with himself inside of it. So, yeah. And there was like, when we brought the kids home when they were babies, we had baby monitors, and, you know, I just chalked it up to picking up radio interference or radio waves, but we could hear giggling. Our middle daughter was giggling, and you could hear like an older lady's voice in there. Hi, how are you doing? You know, and she would be playing basically with this disembodied voice. It's just really weird stuff was happening, but that had to be, I want to say, literally 15 to 20 years ago when all this stuff was taking place.
Yeah, I noticed with my own experiences that after the UFO event, they were coming thick and fast for probably 18 months. But then it started to tail off, and really over the last 15 years, there's been very little. I've only had one sighting. That was during the lockdown that we had here about 3 or 4 years ago. But it just seemed to have tailed off after the initial event. There was a lot at the start, but what is interesting though is the amount of other people that are saying the same things. Now, 20 odd years ago, I would not really have spoke about this publicly. 100 years ago, you probably get burnt at the stake for saying these things, you know, think you were a witch. But there was a program here in the UK just a few nights ago where they were talking about people having UFO encounters were going on to have other experiences afterwards, and they called it the hitchhiker effect. Now, I've never heard of that before. So all of a sudden, now I've brought my book out, and I was a bit concerned about some of the things I put in there, what people would think about me. But all of a sudden, it's starting to become mainstream now. And they were talking about they believe these craft are dimensional rather than extraterrestrial. So it's almost like I've written my book in advance of this stuff coming out, and I've hit the nail on the head by the looks of it. It's certainly quite an amazing insight, especially with the amount of people that have come back to me saying they've had ghostly experiences in the past.
Yeah. Now, you were talking about images in your head, and we kind of touched on the alien telepathy thing. And I was sitting here this morning listening to your book, and I've said this before, as Michelle and I were driving close to this object, this triangle. For me, I thought it was a airliner with its landing lights on, getting ready to crash on a pretty large, but nowhere near able to handle how big this craft was, you know, going to crash on the road that we were on, and we were driving right toward it. As we got closer, in my head, I heard a voice, and it was really creepy. It was, I can't say it was my voice. I mean, it could have been, but the emotions and terror that it instilled in me, and it said, you don't belong here. Get away. You don't belong here. And immediately I was like, oh, we're getting out of here. And I'm listening to your book this morning, and Michelle's sitting next to me and on the alien telepathy thing. And one of the people that sent you their story in your book said almost the exact same thing. I stopped it and I looked over at Michelle. I said, did you hear that? And she's like, yeah, that's crazy. Like, it was almost the exact same message. And that was right before we went on. And I can't help but think that these things, whatever they are, interdimensional or whatever, are showing themselves to people, putting images in their head, putting thoughts in their head to get, and this is going to sound crazy, this is my personal opinion, to get us all together to talk and compare notes about what we're seeing and trying to figure it out. And you were just talking about interdimensional, and we talked some science things before. And right after we saw this, and then COVID started and all this good stuff, me and my chemistry teacher at the school I work at, we went back and forth trying to come up with how these things could possibly be flying. And the answer we came up with was reducing an object's mass to zero by using cold, by dropping and stopping all kinetic energy within a body to absolute zero would reduce its mass to zero. Therefore, gravity wouldn't have any kind of effect on it. And if you can nullify gravity using cold, because a lot of these things show up on radar and infrared as cold, then you can use the movement of Earth, which is going around the sun at 67,000 miles per hour, as a form of propulsion. If you can turn that on and off to grab the gravity, and slingshot yourself these far distances, my hypothesis is that's exactly what's going on here. Because now you're showing me condensation off of this craft. And when I looked up and thought I was seeing a heat mirage on the body of this thing in 2018, and by the way, we had no experience with UFO sci-fi stuff other than popular culture things. I'm wondering if there was a liquid body to it, but I didn't see any interlocking metals like the design on your craft there that people can see right up there. And then it's really funny how you and I have gotten together and have talked before this interview, and we've kind of come to the same, I think, kind of close to the same ideas about how this is going. So take it away, sir.
Well,
let's.
What happened to me was a good friend of mine sent me a video to watch on YouTube by a Dr. Boas Almog, and it's all to do with quantum levitation. So what Dr. Boas Almog did, he got a piece of metal basically and put it into liquid nitrogen, got it down to 0 degrees Kelvin, took it out and put it in a magnetic field, and it just sat in the air. And it sat absolutely dead still, didn't move a thousandth of an inch. It just sat there, and you can see it on the video. And what I noticed about it as well was all the condensation, all the vapor around the metal, because it's so cold in our atmosphere. So immediately when I seen that took me back to the night of the UFO, of when it rose up in front of us, and the fact that we got condensation on the wingtips. I could see it on the left-hand wingtip, and obviously it was on the tip at the front where the little red light was, because I seen mist or smoke around that as well. So then I came up with this idea. So for those of you who can see the model, the liquid on the surface that you can see here that was running up and down may well be something like liquid nitrogen trapped underneath the transparent skin. Now, if these beams that are raised up off the surface actually go down through the skin into the liquid as well, all of these beams are going to be super cooled. They're going to be superconductors, top and bottom. Once you get superconductors, as in the video from Dr. Boas Almog, you get what's called quantum levitation. And I believe that is what the craft is using. It's using quantum levitation. And the vaporization we've seen is come because the craft is so cold when it materializes. And like a heat sink on a printed circuit board, the heat will always go to the point of least resistance. And it's the same with the vaporization on the craft. It's going to go to the 3 wingtips, which is why I seen the fluffy. And it was a beautiful cloud, ever so fluffy. And obviously why the little red light underneath at the front had got like vapor around it as well. That's because it was the front nose that was just tipping down into view. So in the book, I've also got, and you see it time and time again. That's right. That's the vaporization in the corners there. The Michael Schrack. I've got one of his drawings in my book, which shows a craft covered in like pipes, like the back of a refrigerator. Now you do hear this time and time again, people saying it's got all these pipes running around the craft, like a back of a refrigerator. So what I'm assuming happens there is that the liquid nitrogen, if that's what they're using, is going around the pipes. So all of these pipes become superconductors. So you're getting the same effect as the triangle that I've got. You're basically getting metal beams on the surface to become superconductors and to create quantum levitation. So I think it's the same sort of operation that they're doing to get those craft to fly. The tubes, the refrigerator pipes, are the same as serving the same purpose as the beams on the craft that we saw that night. I mean, that, like you say, would give it enough to slingshot it around the planet and get it to perhaps to the moon and back. I don't know if it get it like 3,000 light years to come here. So is that another indicator that these things are interdimensional rather than extraterrestrial? Because I'm sure that wherever they come from, their dimension, I'm sure they'll be able to use the same mechanics there. You know, I've always said this is a science we don't understand. Now, some people might think because this looks like it's liquid nitrogen and superconductors and quantum levitation, which we already have a knowledge of, that it's man-made. But I am telling you, there's no way this craft is man-made. You could tell on the night, you could just tell by the way it materialized, and also the other paranormal events that I've had since that. But I didn't need those events to confirm it, but it actually does confirm it in a way. But yeah, that's why one of my theories that the craft is using superconductors create quantum levitation. The only thing that goes against that slightly is in the book there are 2 people who have actually touched a triangle, and they didn't like freeze their hands to pieces. They actually managed to touch the underneath of a triangle, and one of them, in fact, a guy who now lives in New Zealand, he actually immersed his hand into the nose of a triangle, into the liquid. He said it was like putting your hand into a tin of paint. But at the point he did that, he said there was a fizz and a bang, and the triangle disappeared from in front of him, and they could just see 3 red lights going away, 3 white lights, sorry, going away in a triangular formation. So there's 2 accounts there of people actually touching triangles without actually having any detrimental effect to them. But I do think there's something in this quantum levitation business and the superconductors.
Yeah, I was researching some of is it Boaz, right?
Yeah.
His
BOAZ.
Yeah, his work on the superconductors, and he would take a disc of sapphire superconductors, just maybe a micron thin, and he would cool it and then put it over a track of
That's right.
magnets, and this thing would sit there and hover, and then obviously it's so cold that any of the moisture in the surrounding air around it's just producing clouds constantly. But you can see it just sits in place, and he could change the orientation of it. I saw one group from a college, they made a Mobius strip track, lined it with magnets, and then super cooled one of those discs and put it on top of it and gave it a little nudge, and the thing would go around the track, flip upside down, go around the other side of the track, come back up, flip. So it does seem, at least with our understanding of science in this, there does seem to be some kind of a trend toward using superconductors and, cooling them so that they repel the magnetic field, which is really fascinating. I mean, and to come up with this stuff is, you know, come on. I mean, where would we come up with this stuff? And I wonder if Boaz would, if he ever had a sighting or anything and had some of this stuff put into his head about presenting it and things like that. So I don't know. Do you know anything more about his background and work in this? And are we frozen? Let me see. The lovely connection across the UK once again, Michelle.
No. I've been over here trying to like wish positive juju.
I know, right? You just kind of like keeping your fingers crossed. Come on, the internet's doing okay. But yeah, well, Colin hopefully can join us. Aha, here he comes. All right,
Hello?
Colin, are you back?
Hello,
There we
Wayne.
go.
Hello.
It flipped out then for some reason. Yeah, one of the things I was going to say about the quantum levitation, what I also noticed from that Dr. Boaz Elmog video was it actually did not move, not a thousandth of an inch.
Right.
Now, there's a guy in the book called Mel Orton. He had an encounter just literally 6 miles from where we see in our triangle, and it was 2 weeks before, which is quite incredible. And what he said was it was hovering above this field next to the road. So he stopped his car. It's 3 a.m. He was on his way to work. He got out of his car and he stood next to this huge triangle. It got beams on the surface, the same as the model that I've built. And what he said was it did not move a millimeter, not a thousandth of an inch. It just like it was hanging, like a picture hangs on a wall. It was like that. And it's the same with the video from Dr. Boaz Elmog, that piece of metal, when it's sitting there, it is just absolutely sitting there. You can move it to another position and it will sit there, but it won't.
Yeah, it's really weird
at all. The pitch triangle was not normal. And I think them, there's some cave.
Yeah. Let's see. So with your work and everything and the talking to people and now that things are kind of mainstream, did you ever have to deal with a lot of skepticism or criticism from skeptics that don't believe in the triangular UFOs or UFOs in general? And how do you respond to them?
The simple answer is no. I've not had any hassle. It's been quite incredible. I mean, even people who don't believe in it say they respect my belief, but I've had nobody having a go at me, nobody trolling me, nothing at all, really. No. The only thing I ever get, which always annoys me, is people keep shouting TR3B, and whenever you post something on Facebook, they go, "Oh, that's the TR3B."
Yeah,
which it is, But but as far as chatting with people, no, it goes down really well. It's getting more and more accepted, actually. The older I get, the easier it becomes to chat to people about it. I mean, in my village now, everybody knows they're calling me the UFO man because I've written a book and it's been in the local newspapers. But the response is great. There's nobody taking the mickey out of me at all, which is it's lovely, actually. I've been quite warmed by the way people have reacted over the years. To be honest, it's been really good.
Yep. So, one other question I wanted to ask you as well is, when exactly did your book get published? When did it come out? I mean, you wrote it and then it was released.
It was released exactly 24 years to the date, the 31st of March, 2023. So it was 31st of March, 1999 when we had the encounter. So 24 years to the date was the actual release date. So it's only been out, just a few weeks.
Oh, okay. Wow. See, that's amazing. Because how is our encounters so similar, and all of these people having these encounters, and now we have connected and talking about this. I think that's one of the whole paranormal sides of this thing, is how it gets people. I mean, we had no plans on starting a podcast and now a live show and talking to people about these things at all?
I had no major plans on writing a book. I thought about it. I didn't think I'd actually ever get around to doing it. I'm not really an author, and I can't spell very well.
Yeah.
It's a good job we've got spell checkers. But I don't know what's driven me to do it. When I sat down and did it, it was like I was a different person. Really, it's the same as doing these podcasts. I don't look forward to them at all. I get very nervous before they start. But once we get
So
going,
do we.
you know, it's fine. You never know what to expect.
That is true. Well, I guess that makes this next question kind of mute. I was just going to say, are there any new developments or sightings in the field of triangular UFOs you're currently following or interested in? So is there, obviously you're still following this, and we just talked about the superconductors and super cooled, you know, being able to levitate or quantum locking. But is there anything else that has caught your eye recently that you've been following?
Not really. No, I'm getting a lot of people contacting me all the time, you know, with their own sightings, but they're all, you know, very similar. None that are actually standing out. There's no aliens being involved. They're just generally sightings of triangles that people have had, but the same sort of thing. These are coming from Belgium and France and America, and people are saying the same things again. They've had paranormal experiences along the way. You know, this is a worldwide phenomenon. That's what amazes me, you know, without, well, I suppose I've tried hard, but I've got 130 different encounters. Most of them are close encounters in the book. And that is just, honestly, just scraping the surface. People say, is Hinckley, is it a hotspot for UFOs? And I go, no, it's not. The only reason we've got all these reports is because of me, because I live here and I've made the effort to collect all the reports and to publish them. Now, if you put a Colin Saunders into every town in the United Kingdom, you'd get the same results, I'm sure. You know, I bet every town's had 100 triangular sightings over the years. You know what I mean? So you take that worldwide, there's thousands, and there's lots in America. To anybody who thinks they're a TR3B, you've got to be crazy. There's just too many variants. You know, you don't do that when you're building aircraft. It just wouldn't work.
And not only all of the regulations of flying clandestine aircraft, you know, over major populated cities and not expect to have a crash of any kind. I mean, how many stealth fighters and stealth bombers during testing and stuff here in the US crashed alone? And, you know, it was always just a secret aircraft crash during training today. Okay, have one of these 300-foot triangles crash in a major city would probably not be very good at all. But I know Michelle's chomping at the bit looking at me here. She's got a question she wants to put out to you.
You know, I just want to ask, what advice would you give to individuals who have witnessed a triangular UFO sighting or who are interested in researching and investigating UFO sightings themselves?
Buy my book.
Fair enough.
No, I say that because, you know, when I had my sighting, there was nobody to turn to. You know, I started phoning the UFO magazine, but it was difficult to find people in the mainstream and to find information about what I'd seen. And you sort of end up just carrying it yourself with the knowledge, which is quite, sometimes actually the knowledge of what I'd seen that night was weighing heavy on my shoulders because I couldn't explain to everybody what we'd seen that night. I couldn't take out my mind the images and show you exactly what took place. Otherwise, the whole of the world would be into UFOs now, and we might be living in a slightly different way. Yeah, but by writing the book, I've learned a lot from the book. So if you're new to the subject and you've seen a triangle, then if you go through my book, it will give you peace of mind. You'll know you're not alone. You'll know you're not going crazy. And especially if you've had some paranormal experiences as well, you'll realize it sort of goes hand in hand. So that all of that is in the book. And I wish I could have got a book like that when I had my sighting, because it would calm me down. Because I would say it probably took me 2 years to sort of calm down from the actual encounter. I was hyper all the time because it's just such a mind-blowing experience. And like I say, I wish I'd have got a book at that particular time, and that would have calmed me down. So anybody who's feeling a bit fraught after their experience, then get a copy of the book, read it. It will make you feel a lot better. If you want to talk to me, you can do. Like, send me a message on Facebook. I'm always willing to talk to anybody about their sighting, no matter how crazy it is as well, because there is some crazy stuff going on out there. And the only other thing I'd say, if anybody has a sighting now, I mean, if I was to have a sighting, because people say, didn't you get a picture? Well, we didn't have camera phones back then. We had mobile phones, but cameras were not quite mainstream. But I believe if you try and take a picture of them, and I've done that actually, I did get a camcorder. I was seeing that many things. I thought I'd take a camcorder and record some of them. I had this orange ball of light over the park one night. It was incredible. And when I grabbed my camcorder, and as soon as I picked it up, I knew what was going to happen. It had gone. As soon as I got back to the window, it had gone. So if you ever do see a triangle, don't try and take a picture of it. Just enjoy the moment. Just look at it and enjoy the experience. If you try and take a photo, it probably won't turn out. If it does turn out brilliant, people are not going to believe you. They'll think it's fake. And whilst you're trying to take a photo, more often than not, it's going to clear off. They have this sort of sixth sense, if you like. They know what you're going to do, and they'll be gone just like that. So look at them, enjoy it, remember as much as you can about it, and then do a report afterwards. Either that or just keep it to yourself, but don't.
Yeah, so I want to bring up this comment right here from a new subscriber, Ray Jones. And he said that your interview on the UFO podcast was off the chain, probably the best podcast interview he's heard on that podcast. The guy interviewing was perfect. He just let Colin talk, flawless. Now, I will say, Ray, to me and Michelle's defense, especially mine, I don't think the UFO podcast host had an encounter like we did. So if we seem excited and talking a lot and talking with Colin, it's because we have found each other. And amazing that there's this book and all of these accounts of triangles just alone from the UK that have really, piqued my interest. And speaking of notes and everything, Colin, Michelle and I were asked by MUFON. We finally were interviewed like a year and a half later once we became friends with Bill Konkoleski, who is the state director here of the Michigan MUFON organization. So they had asked that we write things down and then get our interview. So this was my drawing. I'm going to try to put it up here.
Wow. Yeah.
Of the craft and all my notes. And you can see how I did this here in the body.
Is that the cloaking device, you think?
Yeah, it was the heat mirage. And you notice I say no sound, zero sound, nothing.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
There's a guy local to me had a triangle come over his house, and he said it was half cloaked. He could see half the triangle and the other half was invisible. And he was quite calm about it. He said he thought it was the cloaking mechanism wasn't working very well, whatever the craft was. And he didn't think it was man-made. But yeah, sometimes these cloaking devices perhaps malfunction.
So Rick Davis asked, does Colin have a website? I didn't catch it if he gave it. And usually that's a question we ask at the end of the podcast, but we'll just go ahead and put it out there now since Rick has mentioned that. So Colin, how do you?
Unfortunately, no, I don't have a website. But I don't have a website. No. The easiest way to contact me, if you wanted to contact me, would be through Facebook, basically through Messenger, or they could email. I don't particularly want to give my email out in case I get too many.
No, Facebook is good
because I use an email for work for business.
Yeah.
But
so Facebook for everybody out there, if you want to get in touch with Colin, would probably be the best way to go. So before we start wrapping this up, does anybody got questions out there that they want to ask? I saw a lot of things coming through chat, but I was hyper focused on listening to Colin. So does anybody well, Rick, I'll tell you what, since you say you don't use Facebook, you could always email us at the podcast here at mi.ufo.podcast or at gmail.com, and we can forward things to Colin for you. And there's the email up there. But does anybody want to ask questions before we let him go? Because we're about at the hour and a half mark. and I told him we would try to make a hard cutoff at 1.5 hours. So,
well, I'd just like to add, if anybody is interested in the book, it's available on Amazon. You can, it's
absolutely.
hardback, paperback, audio book, and also on Kindle. So you get that from Amazon.com. Triangle of UFOs of the United Kingdom by Colin Saunders.
Yes, sir. And I have the audiobook, and it's very well done. If you get the audiobook, you're going to be kind of disappointed without being able to see the artwork, like from Michael Schratt and pictures of the models and things like that. So I would advise just get both. All right. So you can listen to it while you're driving and then come back and look at the images because they are great. Zen, our famous Mr. X, who's in the chat room right now, says, great book. Yeah, I totally agree. It is a fantastic book, especially if you've had some type of triangular craft experience. Hearing all of these other tales and accounts from people, you'll find out that your experience is not that far off. Let's see.
No, Wayne was making all sorts of connections. Ray said that he just bought it.
Oh, there you go.
Yep.
So Ray Jones says, I just bought the book. Awesome. That's great. So anybody else?
Yeah, if you leave a review.
Oh yeah.
Anybody reading the book,
definitely
if you leave a review, that'd be great.
Yeah.
It's more about spreading the word. I mean, I have to say, I didn't write the book to make money. I wrote the book to put the information out there, basically, and to get my own story out there. I wanted to do that before I got too old, or I retire and go fishing all the time instead of concentrating on the UFO enigma.
Yeah. Well, I'm not seeing anything come across from our audience right now, but once again, people, you can find Colin on Facebook. You can email us here at mi.ufo.podcast@gmail.com, and I can forward things to Colin. Your account, if it's a triangular craft or any really UFO, right, Colin?
That's right. Yes. And I'll talk to anybody about UFOs. I love the subject. It's amazing what's going on. And you need to know you're not alone. And no matter how strange an encounter you've had, these things do happen. So it's always nice to talk to a kindred spirit.
Oh, Jeanette Angel wants to ask, will we find out more about conferences in the UK? Do you have any conferences or appearances coming up?
I've not got any conferences myself. There's the Outer Limits magazine conference coming up again this year. Again, you'll find those on Facebook. It's probably the best place to look for those. So Outer Limits magazine, OLM. They put on one of the biggest conferences here in the UK.
Excellent.
So I've not really been out on the circuit a great deal, but I'm sure after writing this book, I might be going out and doing a bit more.
Yeah. All right. Well, one last question that we always ask, and Michelle's been swinging her arms at me, trying to hit me to get her to ask you.
No, we always ask, do you have any ties to the state of Michigan?
No, I don't. No, sorry, none at all whatsoever.
Well, you do now.
I do now, yes.
Awesome.
I hope everybody's enjoyed it anyway.
All right. Well, Colin, we're going to let you go. And I know it's getting late over there for you. So this has been incredible. We're going to stay in touch. Any new revelations or anything, and you want to come back on the show, you do another writing, you're investigating something, anything you want to let us know, we can put a show together and have you come back on and talk. So we'd love to have you back on. And we're going to, and we'll talk more behind the scenes too. So, all right. Thank you very much, Colin.
That's been great.
And it's been awesome finally talking to you and being able to meet you, and all these people telling me, get Colin Saunders on. You got to see this. You got to hear this. So definitely. So it's been great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wayne. And thank you, Michelle, as well. And for everybody who's listening, thank you for sparing your time. It's been great. Thank you all.
Thank you. All right, Michelle, come on.
Jump back on. I know.
Where are you at?
Hold on.
Wait a minute. There you are.
I'm coming. Here I am.
Hey.
No, because I know Samo said sorry I had to be at work. No, I'm home. I just kept my camera off and in the back to save the bandwidth.
Yeah.
So with all the tech issues, it was like, is it my camera? So no, I was here.
Yeah. She was here hiding in the background.
Yep.
Keeping an eye on you guys. So before we sign off, obviously we want to thank everybody in chat and our moderators, Hellfire, Samo, Goofonian Rockstar from the Goofonian family. So thank you guys for hanging out, our new subscribers. Thank you everybody for joining us. It has been a rough technical start, but things calmed down there a little bit. And I think I might know a little bit of the problem that's going on when we do stuff with the UK. So, and Streamyard, there's something going on there, but I think I have some ideas and I'm going to write their support team and ask them. So yeah. So man, everybody, thank you for joining us. And, if you are interested in helping support the podcast, there's always those links down at the bottom. We've got a Patreon, we've got PayPal, we've got a merchandise store. Just go down into those show descriptions and check it out. So Michelle, what do you think? Are we done?
Have a great Saturday, everyone.
Yes, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this early morning, cold, dreary Saturday morning here in Michigan. And we are going to go ahead and take off. So thank you, everybody. Peace out, and we'll see you on the other side.